Welcome back to another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. And today you'll get to enjoy a musical performance by Eliot Grasso, who is at Gutenberg College in Oregon. We'll practice the 15 tools of learning together. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that we will not have a segment of classical crypto this week. We're working on some brand new content, and we're excited to deliver it to you in our next episode. So go out there and learn something on your own this week about crypto and Bitcoin or alternative coins that are out there. So let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of my podcast. Today, my guest is Eliot Grasso. Eliot is the vice president and a tutor at Gutenberg College in the state of Oregon, where he teaches courses in art, music, and aesthetics. Gutenberg College isn't your typical college. Instead, its mission is to foster in its students both an understanding of the biblical worldview and a desire to seek truth. Does this through a liberal arts undergraduate program that encourages students to learn what it means to live well. Eliot lives with his wife, Kate, and his 3 children, and he is also a talented professional musician described as one of the finest uilleann pipers in the history of Irish music in America, and we will find out what that means later in the episode. But for now, Eliot, welcome to the show.
Hey, Robert. Thanks so much for having me here. It's a great privilege and a pleasure to be chatting with you today.
Well, before we learn about the uilleann pipe, what is Gutenberg College for our listeners who might be unfamiliar with it, and what's the purpose behind it?
Gutenberg College is an educational ministry. It's a 4-year college degree, but we like to think of it as an educational ministry that helps students make sense of the Bible and the world that they live in. So students read the classics, they discuss them in small groups, and it's all done in a close-knit community of people who know each other and who rely on each other.
Yeah, I think with all the craziness going around in the world, we might seem or feel like this is the first time humanity's experiencing some of these ideas or feelings or craziness in society, but it's really something that we've seen over and over again. And I think you guys probably draw that out in a lot of the great books that you guys read. So what is a great books undergraduate program, and what's it all about?
Well, I'm curious about your comment about the patterns, Robert, if I can talk about that for just a second.
Sure.
I read a quote somewhere that said something like, by reading the classics, one can learn with relative ease what others have learned with great difficulty. And to me, that speaks to the notion of patterns. And I think you're right. The sorts of experiences that we, have in our moral rupturing as a culture, in our economics, all sorts of these have happened many, many, many times before in different times and places. So yeah, I think the great books do a good job of helping people see that this ain't that new.
Yeah, I've heard it put this way. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do know history are doomed to watch them repeat it.
That sounds about right.
So we might be in the doomed to watch category right now.
No boy.
But so what are the great books, and what does that mean to get a great books education?
Yeah, the great books are works that have been, really written by powerful and insightful minds on all kinds of massive questions that people have experienced over the ages and I think continue to experience. So if you think of authors like Plato, Aristotle, Dostoevsky, Einstein, Shakespeare, these are the kinds of works that we would classify as great books. And I think that there are a couple of criteria that I would use for what counts as a great book. One is sort of like the timelessness of it, the sense in which it's raising perennial questions, but digging really deeply into them in a nuanced and insightful way. So that'll be one of mine, at least. And a second one would be just the way in which they're executed. Lots of people have ideas, lots of people have insights, and those are valuable sorts of things. But the way you experience humanity in a Shakespeare play, I think, is very distinctive and compelling.
I know it's been a popular thing on social media to believe science over the last 3 years. Is that something that would resonate with your students?
Yes, we definitely want students to interact with that question. Um, Science wears the robes of authority in our culture. So if someone called a scientist says something, then it's the sort of thing that is hard to question. It's hard to ask questions about it because scientists live within this, a lot of times, I would say, veiled mystique that, we don't have access to big, expensive equipment. So how can we test your claims and your outcomes and things like that? And so what we want students to interact with is we don't want them to discard science or to say that science gets everything wrong or that science has replaced religion and that's the problem. But really, what does it mean to know something? Science comes from the Latin knowledge, scientia. So is knowledge in science categorically different from how you and I know things when we're walking around our house? Or is it very similar? Is it the same sort of thing? And so we want students to feel confident that, your questions and experience are not really all that different from the questions and experience of a so-called scientist. So that will be one side. A second is that not all scientists agree. There's a great diversity of conclusions and decisions and ideas about what conclusions are acceptable ones. And we want students to encounter that artful process of sorting through what is true. That's a process that happens just as much in the sciences as in the humanities. People disagree; they talk about things and have to sort out, what we're going to do about it.
Well, it sounds like by reading Einstein that your students who graduate will be much more able to engage in that discussion in a much more thoughtful way than maybe a significant portion of our society here in the United States. When we read great books and these great minds, why do you find that reading primary sources are so important versus perhaps just reading textbooks or someone's interpretation of a great mind's studies and philosophies?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, Robert. Let's say I wanted to understand Chinese history as an English speaker.
Right.
Well, chances are I'm not going to learn Chinese and read all the primary sources in Chinese and sort of put my own picture together. I mean, I could do that, but that would be a lot of work. So I think there is a place for summaries as such when it comes to things like history. But I would want to be really careful about whether I picked up a Chinese history book that were written by a communist or an imperialist.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have really different ideas about the meaning and value of what's going on. And I think that when one only interacts with textbooks, it's hard to get a sense that the assumptions and values and biases that are sort of woven into a textbook, very rarely does someone come right out and say, well, I'm a communist and this is what I think is great. And I think these guys are terrible because X, Y, and Z. When one reads a primary source, when one reads the Confucius, or instead of the summary of Confucius, one gets to the picture of sort of like, oh, this is how you were actually thinking about it. So textbooks can be good because they can be helpful flyover summaries, but the drawbacks are that you're sort of subject to the assumptions, values, and biases of whoever happens to be writing them. And those are rarely revealed. Now, on the primary source side, when you're reading the actual, the Shakespeare instead of the summary of the Shakespeare, I think you're really encountering the artfulness sort of head on. Imagine the difference between seeing a painting in person versus a painting on a mug or a mouse pad or something like that. It's got like kind of some similarities, but in person, up close, it's a really different kind of experience. And I think the experience involves a tremendous amount of nuance, insight, and also difficulty. I mean, these primary sources are hard to read. They can be hard to get at because, number one, the context in which they're written is foreign.
Right.
I didn't live in ancient Mesopotamia. I don't know what those guys were thinking. I have to do some homework to figure out what's going on. So that's a lot of work. But I think that work is well worth doing if one is really trying to get to the bottom of a question. So the primary source side is very inefficient, but it's very rewarding and well worth the time and energy to interact with it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's so good to hear you talk about what's going on around you during a season or a period of history and learning what's going on. Yeah, it's more difficult, but it does give you great insight. So I've been reading this book by Jerry Bauer called The Maker versus the Takers. what Jesus really said about social justice and economics. It says, talking about Jesus and being born in Bethlehem. And so, like, as Christians in the modern day, it's like, okay, Bethlehem, that's where Jesus was born. And that's kind of our context. But for the context of the individuals back then, just like any city here in the United States has different cities. If you think like tech, you think California, or if you think farming, you think the Midwest, or those different cities. When you thought of Bethlehem, if you were living back then, you thought of sheep, because Bethlehem was known for where they raised sheep, and more specifically, it was known for where they raised sheep that would eventually be slaughtered in the temple as part of a ritual sacrifice that the Jews went through. So we all know about that. And so for Jesus, the Lamb of God, to be born in Bethlehem suddenly means a lot more when you have historical context around those details. And of course, I get it from a secondary source who obviously took the time to get it from a first source. So, I think both of those things have its proper role, but the role of textbooks in education have become beyond their intention and beyond useful for many students. And getting back to the source text and its primary, I think is beneficial for a strong classical education. At Classical Conversations, we talk about conversation and we do it in small groups. And I understand that you guys have a similar philosophy. So, what does those discussions look like, and why is that so important at Gutenberg?
Yeah, I think so. If the goal of it is really to transform the learner, which is my opinion of what it is, then one has to be able and willing to sort of get down to one's personal thoughts and ideas and beliefs, and to examine those and to make some decisions about those and see what's going on. So in a dialogue, I think that there's space for people to speak and to look at kind of their own ideas, but also to listen to other people's perspectives, but also to listen to other people's reactions or responses to their personal perspectives. And I think that a dialogue, though it's a very inefficient, messy kind of process, I think there's a really great opportunity for personal growth. Sort of like if I'm willing to be honest with myself and with everyone in the room, which does take time. It's not something that happens right off the bat. It takes a lot of work and effort to build trust with other people. I think that in doing so, the student really benefits from that process, because they can say, okay, well, it's okay to be human. It's okay to be in process. It's okay to not have all the answers right away. It's okay to ask my question and to mull over it, which I think is a very different sort of situation from a lecture. Again, the textbook primary source discussion, lectures have their place. I love a good lecture. But I think that being able to interact with what you think and with what others think is just a different experience from having someone tell you what it is that they think without being able to interact with it.
Yeah, it puts the student out there, right? If they don't know something or can't back up their argument, then it gives them an opportunity to go, hey, I need to go figure this out. Or it gives an opportunity for another student to step in and say, yeah, maybe I agree with you and this is why, and even able to answer that and strengthen each other, or ask another student a question back and get their insights. So I think it does provide a more rigorous education, but also a more fun education.
Yeah, totally. One of the curious things I've noticed, I've been teaching in higher education for over 15 years now, and that when it comes to a Gutenberg education, the students there take much more ownership of what it is that they're doing than any place else I've ever been. And I think the dialogue is really part of that, where it's sort of like, I'm a tutor, but my job isn't to tell everyone what I think. I have lots of thoughts and opinions and stuff, but my job is to facilitate when it's sort of like, they know that I'm not there to tell them what to believe all the time. They're sort of like, oh, this is my job. I have to take this on and do it. I have to do it I have to educate myself, basically, in the context of this curriculum. I think that can create a great opportunity for maturity as well, where it's like, yeah, I gotta drive this life myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're gonna have to do that pretty quickly after college. So you call yourself a tutor, and I know most colleges have professors. So why does Gutenberg call you all tutors? And I think you alluded to it a little bit, but expand on that.
Yeah, sure. We call ourselves tutors because we see ourselves more as guides and mentors than we see ourselves as specialists and lecturers. So, our goal is to help facilitate a student's process and to answer questions when they come up, and to ask questions that we think are important to ask that maybe haven't come up yet. But we're much more the guide on the side than the sage on the stage.
I like that. Isn't the purpose of going to college to get a good job? What would you say to that?
Well, I think we would want to ask two questions. We'd want to ask, what do we mean by good? And I think we would want to ask, why is that important?
Hmm.
So I think on one level, to really get to the bottom of what it means to live a good life has to be more than economical.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be. For the Christian, I think it has to be more than economics. So it's sort of like, it seems to me that, my belief is that God has a plan for each human being, and me particular, everybody. And that plan is going to be fleshed out as we live our lives. And I think that there's a tension in our world where it's sort of, you are totally plastic. You totally shape yourself. You are totally the captain of your ship. You are in control of everything, and you are the one who manages your outcomes. And I don't know that that's true. I don't really believe that myself. So there's some mystery, I think, between what kinds of decisions I'm responsible for making and what God is doing in the project of my life and of humanity in general. But any decision you're going to make in a working environment is going to be based on some kind of philosophy, what you think is good and what you think is bad. Figuring out that stuff, I think, is a skill that takes a lot of time. So before I leap into making decisions that are going to impact me and everyone around me, seems like it'd be good to invest the time and sort of, how is it that I'm going to think about stuff? Am I going to be obsessed with efficiency and do this sort of thing? Am I going to lean toward relational things? How do I decide in a working environment? Say I'm the manager of something. What's the right point at which justice should become mercy if employees are late or not working well? These are all nuanced decisions. And so I think a Gutenberg education kind of slows everybody down, gives them a chance to think about, like, what are we talking about here when we're talking about jobs? We're talking about the meaning of work. We're talking about the purpose of finances. We're talking about the state of economies. And it's just a great time to get one's head around those bigger questions before one starts making decisions without having thought about them.
No, that's great. I think we've just gone through a series of events where the experts, quote unquote, have failed us, right? Whether it's COVID or inflation or, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. These are all very highly educated individuals, at least have gone to a lot of schooling and are supposed experts, but they're unable to see, how the price of oil might affect the price of grain, or unable to make these basic connections where a classically educated person will be able to understand everything is interrelated, which I think is super important. And even people like Elon Musk has started going and saying, hey, I'm trying to hire people with classical education and liberal arts degrees because I can teach them programming. It's very difficult to teach them how to make wise decisions. And obviously he hires a lot of people and probably sees that not very many of them coming out of the big universities have the ability to make good and wise decisions inside of his business. So I think normally most college vice presidents aren't teaching classes and just focusing on the operations of the school. So, like, what do you love about teaching, and what is your favorite class at Gutenberg to tutor, I guess, since you're not teaching per se?
Yeah. My favorite class to teach, I would say one thing I really love is leading discussions in Western Civ on philosophy and history, sort of just getting inside the minds of these authors and how they think about things, and watching students get inside the minds of these authors and watching how culturally different Plato's thinking is from our contemporary culture's way of thinking. just watching those sort of clash of worlds happen as they're reading these dialogues is sort of like, wow, you are thinking really differently from how I'm used to thinking. And just watching that kind of like ability to think about different perspectives and how complicated things are to kind of watch that open up is really interesting and really amazing to see. I think it's really beneficial for administrators to continue to teach because, I mean, if a college doesn't exist for the sake of the students, then for what? And all administrative decisions are made in the context of the student's education. So it seems to me that administrators are in a good position if they're still teaching because they see the humans that their decisions are affecting day to day and know how to care for them and sort of what the situations are. So I feel really fortunate to be able to do both, and it's not easy to do both, but I feel really blessed to be able to do so.
Yeah, that's great. If you'd step back and think about it, it would help you make better decisions as an administrator, being in the grind of teaching at the same time. As the world's changing so fast these days, and you think about students have graduated or students who will graduate, what are like one or two things that you really hope that they come out of a Gutenberg education with, for their local community, for their wherever they end up working or whoever they end up serving as adults?
I would say that God is real and loves them, and that they could look back on their experience at Gutenberg and say, I was loved here. God's love is plausible. I should try to share that with others. That would be a big one for me. I would say one other thing, if that's all right.
Sure.
Which would be, I think that when one lives life, one encounters various kinds of hardship and suffering on all fronts. And my hope is that a student leaving Gutenberg would be able to see that that suffering is not meaningless, but meaningful. Though suffering is painful and hard and difficult, and hardly anyone I know opts into it voluntarily, that it's not just a big meaningless void, that there's meaning to be found in reality and in our suffering.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I would really encourage our listeners to check out Gutenberg's College, especially if you're a classical conversation student. It's going to be very similar to the methodologies that you've been experiencing in our challenge program and continuing to discuss life's big ideas under the just wise counsel of Eliot and other individuals at the college just like him, and they've got a great team there. We mentioned earlier when we started about the uilleann pipe, which I believe is an instrument and not another type of pipe they like to use in Oregon. Just kidding. But yeah, so we have the tin whistle here at Classical Conversations, and our families love the tin whistle. Just kidding. But what is the uilleann pipe? And how is it used in Irish music?
Oh man. The uilleann pipes are an 18th century bagpipe that developed in Ireland. So if you imagine the Scottish pipes where you're sort of standing and you're blowing into them and you're getting red in the face and you've got a kilt on and marching in a parade and that sort of thing, instead of blowing into the bag with your mouth, on uilleann pipes, what you do is you have that tube hooked up to a bellows. So you're seated while playing, you're pumping with a bellows. They're used for dance music primarily rather than military music, which is what the Highland pipes became associated with kind of later in history. So it's for dance music. It's highly communal. It's just great fun. And yeah, I'd say anyone who wants to avoid the temptations of things like football and girls, uilleann pipes are a great opportunity for you.
Well, you got a wife and 3 kids, so could have avoided them too much.
Kate made it through the bubble there. Kate made it through.
So how does one become, a renowned uilleann pipist here in the United States? Does that mean you go to competitions, or are you in a band, or?
Let's see. When I was a kid, I was probably 12 years old when my mom took me over to Ireland for the first time to study this instrument and to learn how to do it. And just by the sheer generosity of many older and more skilled players, they would invite me to come to things and to learn from them and stuff like that. And just being around the music community in Ireland and also in Maryland, DC, the East Coast, just played a lot of music, met a lot of generous people, made recordings, things like that. And just people would generously invite me to participate in things. And I said yes. So just kind of was very organic.
Well, I tell people that my mom made me do 3 years of piano, and she claims it's only 3 months. And I feel like it was 3 years, though. And I tell people that I am not musically inclined. I do enjoy dancing, but I have trouble playing the radio. That's how unmusical I am. But you're obviously passionate about music. So, like, why is that? Why is music so important to us as humans?
Man, that's a great question. I feel like there's a couple pieces to it. I mean, one is I think beauty matters to us. I think community matters to us, and music can be an opportunity to sort of bring those things together where we're doing something together. We're enjoying each other's company. We're listening to something that's interesting and compelling. I think that's a big deal personally. I think as far as playing music goes, and I'm talking to all those CC parents who are enjoying the tin whistle so much right now, is that I think music provides a form of physical discipline actually that is hard to come by in other ways. So like I've got a tin whistle here with me. So it's okay if I play a little something?
Sure. Sound better than my 5-year-old.
We'll see. We'll see.
Wow.
Just a little jig there, but
slightly better than my 5-year-old.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that this idea of music and playing it, you have to be disciplined. You have to be focused. It makes you a really great listener. I don't know if others feel the same way, but I feel like sometimes in our society we have a hard time listening to each other well.
What'd you say? What's that?
Something about lecturing, probably. It makes you a great listener, and it just kind of keeps you in process. Like I was playing with a musician the other day, amazing guitarist, and it's just like, yeah, I got to pick this thing up every day, and I'm responsible for the music it makes, and I got to practice. I got to never always stop practicing. So I think there's some great opportunities to become a better listener, to create community engagement, to hopefully make some beautiful things along the way. So I think it's pretty important for those reasons.
I agree. And I do enjoy listening to music. I just wish I was better at it. And probably because I never started practicing, was probably has something to do with that. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. So if they want to learn more about you and Gutenberg College, what website, social media platforms should they go check out?
Great place to go is gutenberg.edu, gutenberg.edu. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and places like that. If you're interested in engaging more with Gutenberg, receiving some of our free publications that come out quarterly, learning about student engagement events, we do a course called Young Philosophers, which is online, but chances are we're going to be doing something on pop culture through a philosophical lens coming up this year, to see sort of like what exactly is being said here philosophically in, say, the Marvel universe. So a little sneak preview there, but yeah.
Nice. That sounds like fun. All right. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Well, we had a first today, and that was that musical performance. And of course, that is going to be discussed in our classical recap. We look at the 15 tools of learning. Remember, those are divided up into the 5 core habits of grammar, the 5 common topics of dialectic, and the 5 canons of rhetoric. And for the 5 core habits of grammar, we can talk about attending and really differentiate the word from another known idea. We learned about the uilleann pipe today and talked about the difference between that and bagpipes. And of course, I referenced the tin whistle, which, if you're in classical conversations community, our younger students learn to play and practice and really enjoy music that way. And it's very fascinating to learn about the uilleann pipe. And so that's the tool of attending. In the 5 common topics of dialectic, we look at the tool of comparison, where you discover similarities first and then differences. And we talked a little bit about jobs and how we're made for more than just finding a job, but we're made to glorify the Lord. And working is a way of doing that. And classical education is actually a great way to get a job in the new marketplace, because businesses are looking for people who can engage in a myriad of ways, and they can train you to do the specifics of the job, but they need people who can think. And so classical education, a classical education college degree, is getting more and more in demand. And especially as we see the economy changing, that's going to be the case going forward. And finally, in the 5 canons of rhetoric with delivery, Eliot played a song for us, and it's a little jig, and I really enjoyed that. And of course, anytime we can enjoy music, it's a great way to engage the brain, engage our senses, and just see math in motion. So those are the 15 tools of learning that we're reviewing today with our conversation. And now we'll jump into practicing those same 15 tools with a current event. Hello, I want to interrupt to tell you about the Homeschool Families on Mission, which is a program through our nonprofit organization, the Classical Conversations Foundation. Through the Homeschool Families on Missions, the foundation supports homeschooling students seeking to participate in short-term mission trips. In 2022, the foundation was able to provide grants to 55 homeschool students who on mission trips to countries all around the world, including South Africa, Uganda, Czech Republic, Peru, and the Middle East. And you can help in this effort. And we are doing a John 1:1 Mission Partner campaign and asking people to donate just $1.10 to help fund mission trips for homeschool students to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. In John 1:1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God." You can help others come to know this truth. To become a mission partner and donate just $1.10 towards this cause, visit classicalconversationsfoundation.org and head over to the Mission Partner page. After donating, you'll also receive a free ebook from Brian Gilpin, Journey Through Providence, a guide to understanding God's will. And if you make a donation, we would love for you to mention your CC community that you are a member of, because we are hoping that at least one person from each community will donate to this great cause so we can send even more homeschool students on missions in 2023. You can choose to give once, you can set up recurring donations, and we ask you to donate on Tuesday after Thanksgiving, which is internationally celebrated as Giving Tuesday. Each contribution makes a difference. Thanks for helping others to know God and to make Him known. Let's get back to our show. Now let's talk about current events, and we are talking about ESAs, which generally talk about empowerment scholarships, where it's government-funded money following the students, and why, as Christians and classicalists, this does not really align with our understanding of what a biblical worldview is, what the responsibility of civil government, church government, and family government is. And we looked at this in the last episode from a classical perspective. And today we're going to dive in what the Bible says about money, about greed, covetousness, lust, and see if these ideas are compatible with ESAs. Because what I'm seeing is the left's going to make some arguments, the right's going to make some arguments, but neither of them are coming from a biblical perspective, and both are just fighting for power instead of doing what's best for Americans. And so we look at what St. Thomas Aquinas called the 7 deadly sins, started by Pope Gregory I, And those are basically pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. And let's start it off by looking at James 3:14 through 16. And it says, "But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." So this idea of money following the child, it really is rooted in envy and selfish ambition. A lot of the people want this money that the government's taken for themselves. And so that does not align with the Lord and what he's told us in James. If you look at Psalm 37, 1 through 3, it says, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither, like green plants, they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture." A couple episodes ago, we talked about how property taxes are immoral and really some of the worst taxes out there, but they're easy for governments to collect. So when we as Christians say, "Hey, we want to use that tax dollars for ourselves, for what we think is good," we're being envious of what evil people are doing. And yes, maybe we would use it better, but what we should really be fighting for is keeping our own tax dollars, not redistributing our neighbors' taxes into our own pockets. In Galatians 5:14 through 15, it says, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other." We have a system here in the United States where everyone is devouring and fighting each other over tax dollars because our government has gotten so big and so out of control, and it's doing a lot of evil with it, quite frankly. So it is compelling when someone says, "Hey, wouldn't it be better for you to keep your own tax dollars or get it back?" But all that's doing is washing the money through a government lens, taking from your neighbor. So when you take money from your neighbor to educate your own child, you're not loving your neighbor as yourself. You are really being slothful, because instead of figuring out how to pay for your own child's education, you're forcing your neighbor at gunpoint to pay their taxes, to give their money to you. Otherwise, their house is going to be seized and they're going to be left homeless. Finally, let's talk about Matthew 5:38 through 42. And this was Jesus talking. He said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to see you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." And as private homeschoolers, we've been going that second mile. We have been paying our taxes to the institutions that do evil with it, and going the second mile by paying for our own education, or even churches raising funds, or private entities raising funds to pay for private education, so the government keeps its dirty hands off of it. By accepting ESAs or pushing this idea, all we're doing is expanding government power into more areas where the Bible does not give it power. And so we are not being able to live our lives through a biblical understanding of the roles of family, civil, and church government. And instead, we are lusting after the powers of this world. And I'd like to just wrap it up. James 4:2 through 3. "You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." And so it's really important here. It's saying you do not ask God, right? So it's saying that our responsibility as Christians to ask God for what we need, not for the government. When we're asking the government for something that the God says he'll provide, we are going to the wrong source. So in order to fight these seven deadly sins, as Christians, we have these corresponding virtues of humility, charity, chastity, gratitude, temperance, patience, and diligence. And so we need to fight against these bad ideas because they will eventually hurt more people. They'll hurt private home educators, and it will give the statement that, hey, we don't need God, we need the government. And that's not something that Christians should be backing. So that's why Christians should not support ESAs or any sorts of wealth distribution tactics to pay for education, because in the long run, it leads to socialism and it leads to a hurting world and a world that rejects God and what he has done for all of us. And as private Christian home educators, we stand up and show the world that it can be done, that we don't need the government money, don't need the government intervention, and we do a better job at educating our children when those things are absent of an educational system, not when they're present, and all the data backs that up. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I know I did. Please share it with a friend who is in an educational journey, because together we can practice and master the 15 tools of learning. God bless and have a great day.